welcome to Let's Talk. I'm your host, Njabulo. Tonight we invite you to take a step back from the everyday rhythm of campus life. Tonight we look closely at something that has shaped South Africa over 3 decades, transformation. More black children were admitted to university and campuses became more diverse after 1994. Opportunities that once felt completely out of reach started to feel possible. But here's the thing, transformation was never meant to end at access. Beyond the lecture halls, registration numbers, deeper questions continue to surface. Over the years, movements like Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall did more than protest statues. They challenged the very foundation of higher education with questions like whose knowledge are we learning, in which languages, and who gets to feel like they truly belong. Nearly 30 years into democracy, we find ourselves in a difficult tension. And yes, universities have changed on the surface, but has the system itself transformed? Have we redefined knowledge or simply expanded access to the same structures? Tonight, we ask a question that refuses to go away. Have South African higher education institutions truly transformed? Let's watch the insert.
Think back to 1994. There was this incredible collective hope that the very nature of our universities was about to shift. It wasn't just a dream, it was the official promise. Our parents and the generation before them expected a transformation that would finally reflect South African realities.
The opportunities we never had, our children they must go for it.
Mandates like the Education White Paper 3 to the National Plan for Higher Education made it crystal clear. Universities weren't just places to hand out degrees. They were supposed to be engines of justice, fixing the deep inequalities left by apartheid and allowing a space for other ways of knowing to live and breathe. So, 30 years later, where are we? If you look at the demographics, you could argue we have made it. Walk onto almost any campus today, and they are mostly dominated by black students. But physical access is not the same as true transformation. We've opened doors, but has the look and feel of the room changed? We may have a diverse student body and more inclusive photos posted onto university social media pages, but in many schools, we're still looking at the world through a purely Western lens. While we're still on this, let's all remember what happened in 2015. Across universities in South Africa, students began pushing back. You had hashtag Rhodes Must Fall and then hashtag Fees Must Fall. What started as a call to remove a statue quickly became something much bigger. Students were asking real questions. Who decides what knowledge matters? Why are African perspectives missing from what we have been taught? Why is English still the main language of learning? And later, that same year, hashtag Fees Must Fall made something else clear. Access to university isn't equal. For many, it's still shaped by money.
In general, my kids do also not really understand, and they can't, but they also don't try to.
Students are still asking, why are African scholars missing from parts of the syllabus? Why does local knowledge feel like an add-on and not the foundation? So yes, there is movement, there are projects, but it's slow and it's uneven. And for students in the system right now, slow change doesn't always feel like change at all. So the question is, are universities really transforming, or are they just adjusting without ever changing the core?
Without wasting any time, let me introduce our esteemed guest who has played a very huge role in the movement of transformation. Join me in welcoming in studio with me Dr. Claire Kelly, who is the Director of Equity and Institutional Culture at Rhodes University. How are you?
I'm okay. We're very busy getting ready for our transformation in Imbizo next week. So all systems go, and we're very excited to be having that conversation. So I'm okay, a little bit tired, but okay.
All right. Thank you so much for coming to studio
You're
and
welcome.
having this conversation with us that is potentially going to drive the change that we want to see in our institutions and in our country. I have to ask, you've been quoted to say that institutional culture is the water in which we swim in, and that for some it is clear and healthy, but for some it's muddy and unhealthy. Please explain that in depth for me. What exactly does it mean? And what is the institutional culture of Rhodes University?
Oh, okay. Well, those are two quite difficult questions. I will try to do my quote justice. Well, I think, institutional culture is that which we just live in every single day. And for some people, that culture is relatively easy to move through. It is something that they don't feel particularly, they don't necessarily experience as culture. It's just kind of the way things are. And the way things are serve them, relatively well. But there are some of us who move through this culture and we feel it. We can feel where we come up against barriers. We can feel where we come up against like unbelonging. We can feel kind of the weight of this invisible thing that we have to navigate every day. And that's what I meant by, for some people the water is clear, it's healthy, they can navigate that. For some people it's not clear and it's also not healthy, because when you're having to navigate that kind of unbelonging barriers that other people don't have, it impacts on your wellness and it impacts on the amount of energy that you can expend on why you're here, which is to study or to work. And so we know there's a relationship between institutional culture and people's wellness, and we know institutional culture serves some people over others. So that's what I meant. With regards to Rhodes, I think the other thing to understand about institutional culture is it's not necessarily homogenous. You have cultures within a larger culture. So there might be pockets within the institution which are really wonderful and vibrant and where the water is clear for everybody. And you might have pockets which are really not, and where the water is murky for just about everyone in that space. And I think Rhodes is like every other institution in the country, where we have pockets of wellness and of people thriving in general, and we have pockets where they're not. And overall, our institutions struggle to be places that are healthy places for everyone to thrive in.
So will we then therefore say that the water is muddy and unhealthy for the people that are underprivileged?
Well, definitely, I think the water is muddy and unhealthy for the underprivileged in any context. I mean, higher education is another context within which you see that. We can talk about that in terms of like our health sector. You can talk about it in terms of just about any sector in the country. But higher education, that plays out in quite a particular way. So absolutely, yeah. Access to resources really does impact on the extent to which you can navigate the culture of any institution. Yeah.
All right, Doc. South Africa has been in democracy for over 30 years now. And this obviously brings us to the question that it's obviously not the same as it was 30 years ago, but has the transformation pace been satisfactory to many, or at least to you?
Well, I think the answer is no, right? We know this. If you speak to some people, they will say to you, but just look at our students. All of our students are now like Black African students, or the majority of students. Even if you look at our staff cohorts, that, the majority of our staff cohorts are Black African students, and, we have transformed. But that depends on how you define transformation. And I think part of our problem has been defining transformation in very narrow demographic terms.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the work of institutional culture change, the epistemic change in terms of how we consider what knowledge is and how it's created, whose knowledge counts, language transformation, we haven't made nearly as much progress as we could have. We have made progress, absolutely, but not nearly as much as we could and should have. And there are a number of reasons for that. But yeah, we are definitely, I don't think we are where we envisioned we would be 30 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Before getting into the details of this, please help us to define or explain transformation.
That is the question. So the thing with the idea of transformation is that it is a contested subject. Because if, for example, you define transformation in narrow demographic terms, then the fact that our institutions look different in terms of who's here is transformation. But I suppose those of us who do the work in these kinds of portfolios, and those of us who consider ourselves kind of more critical scholars of institutions, particularly higher education institutions, understand transformation to be about demographic change, yes, definitely, but also about cultural change, also about fundamentally rethinking that which is valued and that which is advanced in terms of knowledge, how we value people, how we value the kinds of work that people do. So I actually want to quote our previous Vice-Chancellor, Salim Badat. He makes this distinction between reform and transformation. Reform being fundamentally the structure stays the same, but you kind of make a few changes around the edges, versus transformation is where you look at the structure and you question the very foundations on which that structure is built. And your job is actually to dismantle the structure and rebuild it in a way that serves the current context. So if I were to put my neck out, I would say that we have been reforming as opposed to transforming as a sector overall. Because the fundamental value we place in particular kinds of knowledge, the fundamental valuing of particular kinds of people in relation to those projects is largely the same. So, yeah, I would say that we've been reforming rather than transforming. And then, of course, we ask, well, what about decolonizing? And that's the next level of what we understand transformation to be, yes. Giving it a direction, transforming into what? And
All right. The doors to our institutions have been opened wider for more people to come in. But right now, our classes, or the people who are in these classrooms or the lecture rooms, are now more diverse, and it's a whole lot more people than ever before. Is what is being taught in these classes relevant to the people who are in the classes?
Well, I think we have to ask the people in the classes that question. And I think that's one thing that we probably need to do more of. I mean, one of the kind of the standard or foundational practices of transformation and I imagine decolonization is to have, to be able to construct knowledge with students, kind of with the people that we serve. And, in some quarters that is done extremely well. You'll see that some academics do that extremely well and kind of really work in creative ways for the curriculum to really involve students in the curriculum and to really have the curriculum land with students in a particularly relevant way. And then in some quarters, you don't. I don't think it's standard practice, and I think it's certainly something that could be, that needs to be kind of expanded as a practice. And I also just want to say that it's true as true for the sciences as it is for the humanities. You often hear that, well, you can't decolonize, transform the sciences because, well, a formula is a formula or it's a scientific fact. But you can. And it's about understanding what to do with knowledge and how to work with it and how to make it relevant to the students that you're working with. And in fact, can I just go on a little a little side path?
Please.
There's a colleague at UCT whose name I've forgotten, but he's doing work on translating. He works with multilingualism, and he's working with I think it's cell biology or it's kind of the biological sciences, working with lecturers and students at UCT to translate the curriculum, the kind of creating terminologies as well as teaching materials, in and around cell biology. And he tells the story of how it is so fascinating when you start to talk about cells using African languages, because the kinds of very boundaried language that we use in English to understand a cell as a single unit versus the language you can bring to it from, for example, isiXhosa or isiZulu, fundamentally changes how you think about what a cell is.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important example of what we mean by decolonizing a curriculum. It's about fundamentally shifting or adding to the kinds of lenses we use to look at what we consider to be self-evident knowledge. So that kind of practice is not practice that we see exercised widely over our sector. And it's practices like that need to find more space and more traction if we're really going to talk about decolonizing our curriculum.
So could you then therefore say that multilingualism is an essential tool in decolonizing our curriculum?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, languages don't just contain words to share information. They contain meanings. They contain whole cosmologies, ways of experiencing the world, and ways of looking at the world. And in some ways, we have an enormous gift in this country in that we have lots of languages with which we can look at phenomena that we consider to be taken for granted, like cells.
Yeah.
But it's only through applying these different cosmologies through language that we will ever be able to think differently about how these things work and generate new knowledge, which is really what universities are about. We're not just here to replicate old knowledge. We're here to kind of push the boundaries of the academic and the research project. So multilingualism is fundamental in just that epistemic project, the meaning and knowledge-making project. And of course, it's also essential in terms of creating epistemological access. So when someone has to do their academic work in a language which is their third, fourth language, it really does put them at a disadvantage to a first language speaker. I mean, if I had to do my degree in Afrikaans, for example, I would not nearly have been able to achieve the kinds of results that I could in English, which was my first language. So it's also about giving more people the same kinds of access that first language speakers have to the kind of current knowledge. And it's a very important part of the project.
It's even difficult internalizing songs in a second language.
Yes.
So,
I mean, it's our mother tongue is the first kind of meaning-making lens that we encounter the world through. So when you are accessing knowledge through that lens, it hits differently through when it's a second or third language. So it is an important part of the process of really kind of building the knowledge project at quite a fundamental level.
Right, and how exactly does research support decolonization?
Well, it depends on the research. I think...
Engaged research, maybe?
Oh, you mean, so, okay. Well, I mean, look, engaged research, the whole premise of engaged research is that it serves not just the institution and the researcher who's doing the research. So, you know, very often academics do research for the purposes of their own advancement. So to publish a paper, to gain recognition in their field, to get promotion, and so on and so forth. So the idea of engaged research is that it actually serves people or communities that the research is in and about. So, for example, if you were to do, research with communities here in Makhanda on, say, access to water, that research should, at the end of the day, benefit that community, and the researcher happens to get a publication out of it. So, if you think about it in terms of moving resources and using the resources of the institution to benefit people who have been marginalized historically, it supports decolonization in that way. But I think the important thing to recognize about that relationship is that it has to be one that truly benefits the community that it's serving. A number of research, institutional community research relationships can be very extractive. And we've seen that in the past, where universities go into communities, extract the information that they want, and then they leave. So a decolonial approach to research, serves the communities that serves the communities that the research is taking place in, but also does so in a way that truly values the knowledge that is being shared in that space, in the same way that it will value knowledge coming from a kind of theoretical text from, I don't know, the USA or something. So it's also about how we engage that knowledge and how we take that knowledge seriously, and about holding it up to the same value as we put on knowledge that comes from somewhere in the USA or somewhere from Europe or something like that. I mean, so I would think it'd be in terms of those two things. But I'm not an engaged research expert, so but those are the two things that come.
So that is how we would link research and community engagement as one of the important pillars of institutions.
Yes, I think so. And again, it also speaks to the purpose of universities, like why are we here? And we know that in South Africa, in the 1997 white paper that looked at universities as transformative sites, we understand our universities to be sites that can advance the transformation of our society. So not only through the kinds of education we provide, but also through the kinds of resources we can make available to the broader society. We can make resources available that assist communities, say in Makhanda, with access to clean water. We can do that, and we must do that. We can use our resources to advocate for social change or economic change in particular environments. We can do that. So it's about the role of it comes back to the role of the university, and community engagement done right is a way of doing that. It can also go horribly wrong, but I think I think at Rhodes we have an extremely good model for that, and we see a very kind of iterative relationship between the university and our communities. You see one that is mutually beneficial emerging there. But again, you would need to speak to Dai Hornby about that. She's the pro.
She's amazing. I have to ask, so what exactly, or how could we say, what is the importance of community engagement and transformation?
Yeah, well, on a number of levels, I think. The first is that just in terms of the student experience.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this enormous privilege of having young people come into our institutions for 3, possibly even more years,
Mm-hmm.
and we become custodians, or we become guardians for those young people, and have this, lead them through an educational process, but also through a process of, becoming active, responsible citizens.
Mm.
So community engagement is a wonderful space for that.
Mm.
Particularly, when you have to, as a young person, go and work with a community that may or may not be as well resourced as the one that you come from, to learn how to do that in a mutually respectful way, and not in a way that is, what's the word I'm looking for? Patronizing and kind of looks down on people in that community. To learn about that relationship and to learn what you can do in your world in order to really make positive change in your society is a deeply transformative thing for us to be able to, or a transformative experience for us to be able to offer students.
Yeah.
And I mean, what we're trying to do, so particularly from our office also, is that we are creating opportunities for conscientization for students as they move through their academic programs, to learn about things like gender-based violence. What is it? How do you navigate this?
Please, what are these opportunities that you're creating for students to learn about conscientization?
Yeah. Well, so they start with my wonderful team, who, first of all, we have a program called Transformation Reps.
Mm-hmm.
Keketso is one of our transformation reps, or she works with the transformation reps. And so what we're doing with the transformation reps is there's one from every residence and then one from the LP environment, where we train these reps to be able to facilitate conversations with their peers about gender-based violence, consent, sexuality, disability and disability inclusion. And then they host discussions amongst themselves in their residences to understand what these things are, because they are actually not self-evident, to understand how to assist, or how to kind of assist people with, for example, if someone has a gender-based violence complaint, where to take that complaint and so on. So they become educated about these things, and also the kinds of mechanisms we have in place to serve students in relation to these things. So that's one of the ways in which we do that. We also do it through campaigns and general engagements. So this month was Sexual Assault Awareness Month. During September, we do disability awareness throughout the month, and then we have a Disability Awareness Week. We do, so it's through kind of engagements of this nature. And then through requests. So sometimes there will be something that happens in a resident space, and someone will request, or warden or student will request that we come and talk to people about a particular matter. And so, we use every platform we get to be able to kind of talk to students about these things, and to kind of unpack some of what it is that these things mean.
You've tied it up quite beautifully because you started by explaining research, then you went into community engagement, and right now you just went into teaching and learning, which I believe is it happens during the conversations that the transformation reps lead, because teaching and learning happens through conversation. And I really love that. I have to ask you, where does the love or the passion for transformation stem from in you, and how can we spark it in other people?
That's a, yeah. Well, I mean, I think for me, so I think it's obvious that I'm a white woman doing transformation work.
Big.
In this day and age. And it's interesting because I'm a member of what is called the Transformation Managers Forum, which is all the managers, directors who are responsible for transformation or institutional culture, this role across the country, and I'm the only white person in it. And so people are like, what are you doing here? And the thing is, what motivates me is that this work is extremely liberating.
Yeah.
It's extremely liberating. It's extremely liberating from the stuff that you are taught as a child.
Yeah.
And it's also true for men who are in conversations about masculinity. So for me, it's been about understanding my whiteness. And I mean, I grew up in a dreadfully racist, environment. I mean, I was at primary school in the 80s. I mean, I'm that old. And, and so what you realize at some point in your life is that you really have been lied to your whole life about other people. And once you start to ask those kinds of questions, your whole world opens up. You all of a sudden you see the world completely differently. It's extremely liberating. And I think that's true for men too, when they realize, they've been fed these narratives about what it is to be a man and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So I would say, in a way, I've been in it for myself, because you can be in it for yourself. You can. People don't understand how working for racial justice is good for me, but it is. Just like working for gender justice is good for men. Yeah. Because it is so liberating. So I think that's one thing, and then also just having a real, kind of a very visceral response to unfairness since I was a child. Some of us just don't do unfairness. We just can't. And you usually find those of us amongst these kind of activist communities. But I think to find the spark really is it's a question we're asking at the moment, because our team also does work with student leadership, kind of asking questions around what is the role of student leadership in advancing transformation. We ask that a lot. What does activism look like in this day and age on a campus like Rhodes University? But I think the spark is to realize that you're not just advocating for the humanity of other people, you're advocating for your own. To be racist is to be slightly not fully human. To be sexist is to be, to dull a part of your humanity. And so once you start unpacking that stuff, you can actually access your full humanity in a way that you've not been able to before. I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes sense to me.
It does.
Yeah.
So it gives you access to your full humanity. That's quite a beautiful way to put it. I'm taking it in. I'm noting it down and thinking that I need to share this information with as much people as possible. Because
right.
What do you mean?
Do you want to come and work in our office?
Take my numbers. Okay, I'm really. We have to go back to multilingualism, and I have to ask, what is Rhodes University doing about multilingualism?
Well, Rhodes is actually has a very good track record with regards to multilingualism. Actually, so we've been very privileged we're very privileged to host the Saatchi Chair. For oh gosh, she's going to be angry. I don't know. For multilingualism and something.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long name. So Prof. Deon Nkomo.
Mm-hmm.
And through his work, he's been able to kind of advance quite a lot of work internally.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, one of the first institutions to allow, to create the circumstances for students to submit their PhDs in isiXhosa, for example. We know that our politics department is one of the first departments in the university to translate its curriculum for some of its courses at first year level, creating glossaries and assessments, as well as course materials on isiXhosa as well. So you have academics like Prof. Sibukazi Magadla, who's been doing that work in her capacity as an academic for the longest time.
Yeah,
too.
she's amazing.
She is amazing, and she's a really good example of how you can advance multilingualism in your small sphere of influence as an academic. Right? All institutions, I don't know if you know this, but 2 years ago, the DHET gave every institution in this country, or every university in this country, to be clear, 2.5 million rand to implement multilingualism projects, but specifically for the advancement of African languages. And through that project, we have been able to translate a number of first-year course outlines, assessments. We have been training tutors to be able to tutor in a multilingual way at first-year level, and we're also producing research and with colleagues, particularly at NMU, that we're working together with to kind of document practice, because there's a lot of practice across the country that isn't documented. People are just doing it there in their little corners.
Yeah.
And so to document practice, this is where I discovered the gentleman who does the cell biology work, was through that engagement. So we do a lot. It is at the tip of the iceberg, though. And, I think the important thing to understand here is that Rhodes can do the work that it does, but it is a sectoral level challenge, and it is one which is why the DHET gave all the universities 2.5 million rand in order to do this work, because they recognize that it's a sectoral level challenge. And so one of the biggest the next step really is for all institutions to get together and to start to share their resources amongst each other. Because, for example, UCT, part of its engineering curriculum has been translated into isiXhosa. Now, if you're at another institution that does engineering, you don't have to do it yourself. You can just draw on UCT's curriculum. So, so I think there's a lot of work being done. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
So is the challenges that Rhodes University, or are the challenges that Rhodes University is being faced with also the same challenges that other institutions are being faced with regards to transformation and multilingualism? Similar,
yeah. So the thing with multilingualism and why, where the biggest barrier, again, you would probably need to speak to Prof. Nkumo about this because he's more knowledgeable. But remember that all our universities are operating in a particular knowledge economy. And so as academics, academics are required to publish. And depending on where you publish, you gain more income for your institution, and or certain journals are recognized more towards promotion and things like that. There are no African language. Well, I would stand to be corrected, but most of the journals in which our academics publish are English. And so if you think about what is going to motivate an academic to write in their own, or in isiXhosa or another African language, they're not going to be rewarded for that in the bigger kind of knowledge economy. And so that's a real barrier to multilingualism in higher education as a sector, because the work is not rewarded in the way that work that is conducted or done in English is rewarded. There's no kind of monetary value, there's no promotional value.
Yeah.
And I mean, academics want to advance. They want to, they want to advance their careers. They want to be able to make their contributions in an international arena. And so, one of the things that really needs to happen is that this infrastructure for that knowledge economy has to be built. So journals. Ways of recognizing academics who are doing the work of multilingualism alongside their kind of, with their core work. We need to be able to reward academics for that. And that currently we don't have a system to do that.
Okay, so please allow me to read this question.
Okay.
Okay. There is a term gaining traction in scholarship on higher education, decolonial washing. Where institutions respond to call for decolonization through slogans, workshops, rename buildings, and symbolic gestures, while avoiding deeper questions or transformation that will actually distribute power, change curricula, or address structural inequality. A study that was found in many South African universities, including Rhodes University. This has responded primarily through symbolism rather than substantive curricular change. Is that a fair charge? And how do we ensure that we celebrate as transformation is not simply performance?
It's a very fair charge. I call it performative transformation, and I have said in a number of times in my career doing this work that I'm not a PR unit. If you want someone to do PR for you, go and get someone to do PR for you, because very often these functions are used in a performative way. It's the stuff that institutions want to show that they're doing the right thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when we are doing that at the expense of substantive change, then we have a problem, as you say. I think the challenge here has to do with leadership and with the people in my roles, and also academics, people who have influence within the institution, refusing to do the performative work. I remember when I arrived here, I said to my team, we're going to be doing very unsexy work, very boring, scratching around through policies, looking at how protocols work. We could be out there, and we do have to run campaigns, and we do, where we are able to actually, where we are running a project that actually, we do want to share, we will share that. But a lot of this work is very unsexy. And I think we have to resist the urge to just do the stuff that for which we get applauded for, as practitioners. I think the other thing that we need to be doing is that being very clear about what we mean by transformative and decolonization, transformation and decolonization. For example, we are having a big Imbizo next week. Having an Imbizo is not transformation work. It's a method in order to start doing the work. If we stop at having the Imbizo and we look, we had an Imbizo wow, and we can get that onto the websites and so on, and it'll look great, and look at Rhodes, it's doing amazing work. That is not the work. That is where we kind of plan the work.
Yeah.
The real work happens, you know, when we are in our classrooms, when we are in our meetings, when we are, you know, at the coalface, as it were. So I think we also need to be clear with ourselves what the work is. And I think, you know, we are allowed to critique. We are allowed to critique these things. You know, if you know, we feel our institution is doing something that is purely performative, we are allowed to critique that and say, why are we doing that? What is that actually going to change? Not that I'm completely opposed to, you know, I think symbolism is important. I think visual culture is important. It signals something, it communicates something, but not at the expense of kind of the substantive work, which is ultimately, it's about changing relationships and changing how resources flow through the institution. That's fundamentally what it's about.
Doc, I could soak up in all of this knowledge like a sponge in water, but right now we have to go for an ad break. Informative conversation, questions have to spark. And in studio with us, we have Keketso and Lazarus, and I'm very excited to ask them what questions, or I'm very excited to ask them what exactly was brought up in your hearts, or what exactly do you guys think needs to still change in relation to the conversation that we just had with Doc?
Thank you so much for the question. I think for me, based on the conversation that you were having with Dr. Claire Kelly, I was trying to map where transformation needs to happen. But I believe the most significant part of the conversation is to also start by acknowledging where transformation has happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the conversation you're having with Dr. Claire Kelly actually did. But also, I want us to move away from transformation in terms of demographics and numbers.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that takes away the gist of the conversation.
Yeah.
Now, I want us to focus on the students within these institutions, because they are the greatest stakeholders for these universities. For example, I want us to speak about what transformation looks like for queer identifying students.
Yeah.
What transformation looks like for differently abled students. You know, for students from low-income households. Because we can speak about transformation broadly, but at some point we have to contextualize it. Because transformation for all these three groups of people that I have mentioned might seem differently. I think for me as a queer identifying student, I'd want to look at transformation on the level of the content that is based on queer history, queer activism being shown, being taught in these classrooms. And not only being taught, but also being a little bit examinable. Because it's one thing to teach, but then where does the knowledge go?
Yeah.
And then I want us to talk about universal access for differently abled students.
Yeah.
How far are we on that, you know? So I think those are the three categories that institution needs to channel their focus into, in addition to everything that they've already been doing on multilingualism and the demographics that, you know, they usually speak about. Because I could sit here and argue that the demographics are not necessary transformation because they came as a response of something. You know, we could start here and talk about, you know, the external institutions that allowed these universities to have the demographics of black students coming from low-income households. For example, NSFAS is one of those external entities. We have the NRF for postgraduates. So those are not necessarily the works by the institution, just that the institution tend to, you know, gain more from the work that is done by these external entities.
Yeah.
So yeah, that will be my submission on that matter.
I have to ask, before we move swiftly to Keketso, that how exactly can we ensure that all these wants and needs that you're mentioning are brought into realization or they happen?
I think we need to center the conversations where the students are. Because you cannot speak about transformation for students without the students. And then I'd like to piggyback on a point Dr. Claire Kelly mentioned, that when we have these conversations with student leaders, we try to ask them, what does transformation or activism look like within student governance? So we need to have a good working relationship. When I say we, I'm referring to the broader institution.
Yeah.
We need to have a good working relationship with student leaders. And then there are different level of student leaders. We have, you know, the leaders at the residential level.
Yeah.
We have society level.
Yeah.
We have the SRC, and then, you know, the student parliament and the other bodies. We need to have a good working relationship with those people,
Yeah.
because they are our buy-ins, or ways that we can actually engage with the broader student body here at Rhodes University. So without them, without a good working relationship with them, that's when we start misrepresenting the needs that the student body actually have.
Yeah.
And then that's where the problem starts.
Yeah.
So I would say, as a university and all other higher learning institutions, we need to try to build bridges between the institutions and student governance.
Yeah.
You know, because that's where the student leaders operate. That is their domain. And then that's where they tend to bring the issues from a grassroots level to higher management in every institution. So more or less wanting to wait students to come to them, I would suggest that they start coming to the party of student leadership, because student leaders do have, you know, pockets of their own engagements on campus. And then it should not only be that, okay, they didn't send out an invitation, but rather more of an engaged approach from, you know, senior management of any university to go to these leaders and ask, what do you have planned for this term? What do you have planned for this month that we then can come and support, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it should be more of a reciprocation between the two entities,
Yeah.
not only based on one direction.
Thank you so much, Lazarus. Keketso, what has your experience of transformation been here at Rhodes, and how exactly do you think, or what exactly do you think still needs to change?
I think for me, my experience at Rhodes, just as a politics student, firstly, I always say the political culture of our country is the biggest problem. And exactly what Dr. Kelly just said is that our institutional culture is the biggest problem here at Rhodes University, and these are the things that we need to poke at. Because in terms of institutional culture, some of us can move very clearly, very easily through it, some of us can't. And I always think, and I think back to what Dr. Kelly just spoke about the purpose of university. In one of my developmental studies classes, we spoke about what exactly makes you want to study about development. Why exactly are you studying what you're studying? And I spoke about how when I came to university, the biggest thing I wanted to do is ensure that I'm prepared enough to actually make change. And I feel like university is a place where I can learn to do that. And my experience at this particular university is that it showed me how my idea of political culture is closely linked to institutional culture. And it added the idea of what institutions actually allow and what they don't allow. And in your opening, you spoke about how access, when we think about transformation right now, we think about, oh, we've opened it up for everybody. But we don't actually add the intersectionality to that. We don't add the idea that actually it's open, but there are different forms of inequality playing right now. Like Laz spoke about, differently abled people. What does that look like? You know, as a woman sitting right here, like what does it look like for me? Also, as a light-skinned woman, what privilege do I get within such spaces? Right. Also, being able, just all of us sitting here, being able to speak the way that I'm speaking. What privilege does that give me? Or what door did it open? You know, and also those are the type of things that I think about. But also being a student, I also think about knowledge production. In terms of who's producing the knowledge that I'm taking, and also what will I produce going forward. And a big buzzword within that is decolonization. How do we decolonize? We do scholars like Taiwo who says that, yeah, you can decolonize, but don't take away everything. But then I'm a proponent of Steve Biko, and Steve Biko says, let's do away with everything and let's restart. You know, so those type of things are the things that I think about when I think about my own university experience. And I think about how, like Dr. Kelly said, that universities are the custodians of the change makers that they want to create. So if we're not actively teaching people to decolonize and we're not preaching decolonization, then we're the custodians of the history that we've always had. You know, we're not transforming anything, we're just reforming things. And that's what I think about when I think about my experience at Rhodes University.
And please enlighten me, how exactly do we decolonize?
I think I'm going to have to repeat this again. I'm a proponent of Steve Biko, so the way in which I think we must decolonize is do away with it all. You know, let's start afresh. The world we live in right now is completely different than the one that we lived in the past. And while I appreciate the efforts made by your Steve Bikos, your Chris Hannies, your Winnie Madikizela, you know, your Lindiwe Sisulu, all of these revolutionaries, unfortunately, the world that they imagined for us is not the world that we live in. Right? Even the issues that they thought we'd face right now are completely different. And so as the change makers of today, we need to frame a world and a transformation that looks exactly like what we're experiencing right now. And I think transformation is what depicts the actual situation right now, what transforms what's actually currently happening in the world and the society that people live in. So for me, decolonization is closely linked to transformation and looking exactly like what it's supposed to look like, considering the people that are living in that particular world.
All right. I have to ask one last question to Keketso, then we'll move back right to Lazarus, answering the same question. If students sit here in the span of the next coming 10 years and have the same conversation, who do we have to blame for that, and how can we ensure that that doesn't happen, that there aren't students who are going to sit here and have the same conversation that we're having today?
I think we blame everybody. And I don't say this without engaging with what I'm saying. I think we blame students. I think we also blame the universities themselves. Students mainly because just by sitting here, Laz and I are being activists. Right. Just by students engaging in these different forms of leadership, we're being activists. Right. We can't expect the change to just happen from the top because we need to ensure that change happens. Right. And we blame the universities because you are custodians of change makers. So you have a responsibility to ensure that the change makers are actually making change. And so you need to be allowed, you need to allow the change makers to make a change even in yourself. So in order for us to make a change in the university needs to allow us to make a change in them. But also in order for us to make a change, we need to decide to make a change. So I think the responsibility falls on both sides. It falls on us to ensure that the world that we want is the world that we see, because we need to be activists for ourselves. And it also falls on the university to ensure that we have the space to be the activists that they want to produce to the world.
And the same question to Lazarus.
I think I agree mostly with what Keketso has said, but I would like to rope in our communities also into the conversations. Because before we get to the universities, we come from communities, right? So that affects how we are socialized, how we grow up, how we view the world. And right now there's a very pessimistic view into leadership from our communities, which is why every conversations that happens at the university level, people always encourage us to go into our communities, have these conversations with the learners within the schools, because by the time they get to universities, they already have this deep-rooted pessimistic view of everything. For example, when it comes to voting, we have to do voting campaigns, voter education from universities all the way to the schools. But we still sit with the same problem that we are not getting anywhere, right? So in terms of the youth, I would want to say, I would blame the youth because now, especially people who are in universities, now you are sitting at a slightly privileged pedestal, that you are at this institution that has somewhat opportunities that you can actually utilize to, you know, champion any kind of change. For me, at the university, when I got to university, my first thing that I wanted to do was to form part of leadership, form part of something that when I leave Rhodes University, I can say, okay, I was part of this movement. And for me, that has always been advocacy and activism, you know, for queer people, for differently abled people, and for students who come from low income households. Because I can relate to all their struggles, right? So I would say to students within universities that when you have the opportunity, when you have the chance, grab it, use it, so that you don't come back 10 years later and say, but then we're still stuck with the same issues. When you had the opportunity to go to Barrett, when we have these ministers, to go and engage them, you know, problematize their approach to politics and governance. And then I would say the universities also, when we arise as activists, when we arise as student leaders, universities need to stop targeting us. They need to stop victimizing us. Because the moment you victimize student leaders, that is when you kill the spirit of activism, the spirit of change in any capacity. Because the first thing that happens to me when I think of, you know, leading, even if it's a peaceful mobilization to submit a memorandum on the issues of, you know, funding that we are facing as students, the first thing that comes to my mind is I'm here to get my degree, and then I cannot afford to have anything else, you know, stop me from getting my degree. So universities also needs to stop victimizing and targeting student leaders, because that is when we kill the whole future that they claim that we are. Because when you making the environment not conducive for us to navigate, to engage you critically also, then what should we do? Where should we go? Then they come back and blame us for not even engaging them where they are. So I think the approach needs to be three-tiered. You know, the universities, the youth within the university, and the youth outside of universities. Because there are people who are doing great things outside of universities that contribute positively to our communities. So they also need support. And then in our communities, you know, so we need to have a collective approach to transformation alongside activism and advocacy, because I believe that is where the conversation starts. When we start to pinpoint that, okay, this is wrong, and then for that to gain awareness, we need to, you know, speak about it, which is advocacy. And then we need people who will be, you know, brave enough to take the mandate and carry it forward, which is activism, and then it leads all the way up. So I think that should be our approach going forward.
Beautiful contribution, Lazarus. And you heard it from the man himself, that when you get the opportunity and the chance, you should grab it. And therefore, I'd like for us to grab this opportunity and chance into an ad break.
You've made it through undergrad, perhaps even settled into a job. The brightest future is in your hands. But how many people achieve anything worthwhile entirely alone? Let's talk about a university globally respected for research, with closer guidance, relevant courses, the potential bridge between aspiring and real success. Rhodes University, where leaders learn.
What tonight's show really showed us is that transformation is not as straightforward as it's often made out to be. We are led to believing that transformation was about access, but it is actually what happens after you get into these spaces. What are we being taught, and whose knowledge is seen as legitimate, and who still holds the power? But bluntly, transformation as it stands today has only scratched the surface, because a lot of students are still walking into these spaces feeling like they have to shrink or translate themselves just to belong. And we cannot ignore where the system comes from, the theories, the structures, the standards, or how much that we're still inheriting from this country's dark past without questioning. This is not just a university issue. University spaces shape how people think, They shape who speaks and who leads and who gets heard. The knowledge we center and the knowledge we push to the margins has real consequences out there. And the truth is that this is still an ongoing conversation, one which we're still figuring out and one which we're still pushing against, and one that does not end here. So maybe the real question is not have the universities transformed, but rather who is transformation really for and who still gets to feel like they still have to wait. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Njabulo Howard, and this has been Let's Talk. Remember to keep talking because silence changes nothing.